Many holidays are celebrated in the United States, but there's one important day that stands apart from all the others. Tax Day, which is usually on or around April 15th, is observed by a huge part of the country. In 2019, about 156 million tax returns were submitted for the 2018 tax year, and taxes involve a huge amount of money. The IRS brought in about $3.1 trillion through individual income and employment taxes in 2018. So taxes are clearly a big deal, which is understandable to most people. Federal taxes finance Social Security, the US military, the list goes on. What isn't so understandable is why filing your taxes is so complicated and expensive. Let's start with the complexity. The phrase filing taxes refers to the process of filling out a series of forms, or tax return, with your financial information and calculating how much tax you owe the government. The main form is called the 1040, but there are over 800 others that must be selectively added depending on your circumstances. So where does this financial information come from? The answer is information returns. The most well-known of these is the W-2, which is for employees, but there are many other types, including a series of forms called 1099s that are used for other kinds of payments, like business income and dividends. Information returns are sent to both the IRS and the party they apply to. In the case of the W-2, they are completed by employers for employees. This all happens well before tax day, so when you file, you typically input the numbers from the information returns in the right fields on your tax return, double-checking the forms to make sure that they match your personal records. Of course, filing involves a lot more than this. There are many other features in the tax code that make reporting more difficult. Because of this, many Americans hire accountants or buy software to go through the process. This helps to explain why it's also so expensive. The IRS says that the average taxpayer spends 13 hours and $200 on tax filing over the course of the year. However, this is just the average. Business taxpayers, which are 1/3 of filers, average 24 hours and $410. Overall, this amounts to almost 2 billion hours a year, as well as out-of-pocket costs of $32 billion. Other analysts say that filing taxes actually takes up to 9 billion hours, with tax compliance costing the economy more than $400 billion a year. This explanation should raise some questions. For example, if the IRS is receiving copies of all the information to double-check our work, why can't they fill out our tax returns for us? This isn't as foreign an idea as it sounds. Well, actually it is. Pre-populated returns have been implemented in a number of other developed economies, including Sweden, Spain, and Chile. In these systems, taxpayers are given the option to accept the prepared documents, edit them, or discard them, and fill out the documents themselves. However, while the idea is raised regularly in the United States, Congress has banned the IRS from implementing it. Why? The most cynical, but probably the most accurate explanation, is lobbying. Remember those $200 per person spent on tax preparation? Tax prep companies have a vested interest in keeping things as complicated as possible. This probably explains why the TurboTax parent company, Intuit, has spent an average of over $2 million a year lobbying Congress in the past, though they claim that their goal was to prevent a conflict of interest. Still, pre-populating returns won't magically make tax filing easy for everyone. There are still plenty of people who wouldn't be covered. Take Denmark. While more taxpayers there accept government-prepared returns than just about anywhere else, about 1 in 5 still request adjustments. Even if the IRS could pre-populate forms, it doesn't have the resources to do it. If it did, it would have enough information to pre-populate returns for no more than 40% of taxpayers. With all the information returns and reporting requirements, how could the IRS be missing so much? This comes back to the biggest problem with the US tax code, and the thing we've been dancing around this whole video. Its fundamental complexity. At the risk of stating the obvious, a functional tax system doesn't need 800 tax return forms riddled with things like, well, this. It would be very easy to blame the IRS at this point, but this would be very unfair. While it's their job to enforce the tax code, they don't have any hand in writing it. That's actually Congress's job, which is funny since they're always criticizing the IRS for how complicated the tax system is. So why has Congress made the tax code so complicated? Unfortunately, the tax code is one of the main ways that the US government spends money. This is accomplished by providing certain entities or conditions with preferential tax treatment, which can take the form of exclusions, deductions, and credits. It's a bit controversial to say that deductions and the like are equivalent to government spending, especially in the US, where politicians tend to be even more aggressively against taxes than in other countries. This explains why preferential tax treatment is so popular here, though. It's politically easier to pass a tax deduction for buying electric cars than it is for paying people to buy them. However, if you look at the end result, the government is still left with the same amount of money, which is why economists pretty much universally refer to these kinds of things as tax expenditures. Academics generally find these less desirable than other forms of government spending. They're often regressive and ineffective. Most importantly for us, though, because they're relatively easy to pass into law, they account for more than 400 additions to the tax code on a yearly basis. The effects of their popularity are tremendous. The CBO estimates that the government loses about as much money on tax expenditures as it makes through the individual income tax. That's more than the cost of defense spending and Medicare spending combined. This makes obtaining and keeping tax expenditures a huge part of lobbying. Unfortunately, the $2 million spent on a yearly basis to prevent pre-populated filing is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how lobbying affects the tax code. Of course, lobbyists aren't the only ones to blame. We are too. Consider the tax exclusion for employer-sponsored health insurance, which is the biggest tax expenditure right now. In some other countries, if you receive health insurance from your employer, it would be considered part of your income, meaning that you'd be taxed on the cost of the policy. This actually makes sense if you think about it. But eliminating the exclusion would be so unpopular that it would probably be impossible. But wouldn't eliminating these popular deductions mean that we'd have to pay more in taxes? Well, ideally that wouldn't happen. Tax rates should go down to compensate for the lost deductions. This is what happened when New Zealand reformed its tax system in the 1980s. The tax in their upper bracket was cut in half. Of course, what would actually happen is largely up to political reality. The current tax system is complex and counterproductive, and there are definitely significant changes that can be made. Unfortunately, the 2018 tax reform made only minor improvements at best in this regard. And without a complete overhaul, things are unlikely to improve much. Until these changes are made, there are two approaches that you can take in dealing with your taxes. The first, of course, is to make more money, so that it's easier to pay someone to take care of your taxes for you. Alternatively, you could learn more about how tax filing works and file your taxes yourself. Whatever your choice, we'll be making videos that will be helpful. If you want to learn more about the topics discussed in this video, we'd recommend the book A Fine Mess by T.R. Reid. The author of this book is a well-known reporter who traveled around the world to interview tax officials about how taxes work in their countries, and it covers everything we talked about in this video in much greater depth. We'll be back with more tax and financial videos soon. In the meantime, don't forget to file your taxes, and thanks for watching.